My son told a room full of people that I had wasted my life. I'm Robert Caldwell, and I want to tell you why that was the most expensive thing he ever said. My son Daniel believed he knew everything about how his mother built her music career. How the brilliant Catherine Caldwell rode her way from a small studio in Halifax to sold-out venues across the country, while his useless father spent 20 years giving guitar lessons to teenagers in a rented room above a pharmacy. But when the entertainment lawyer opened the co-publishing agreement at the estate meeting in Toronto, Daniel's entire understanding of his family was about to collapse around him. Because sometimes the people who stand in the spotlight forget who built the stage. I stayed quiet the night he said it. I sat in the third row of the Rebecca Cohn Auditorium during the memorial concert and listened to my own son tell 400 people that I represented everything a man should not be. I did not argue. I did not stand up. I just listened, and I waited. It started in the spring of 1989 when I was 27 years old and working nights at a shipping depot on the Halifax waterfront, making $14 an hour to pay rent on a bachelor apartment in Dartmouth. During the days I wrote songs, not professionally, not ambitiously, in the way people use that word to mean chasing something. I wrote because the ideas came, and I needed somewhere to put them. I had notebooks everywhere. In my jacket pocket, on the nightstand, on the kitchen counter beside the coffee maker. Melodies arrived while I was moving cargo containers. Verses assembled themselves during the bus ride home. By 1989, I had written over 200 songs and recorded none of them. Catherine was the one who changed that. I met her at an open mic night at the Seahorse Tavern on Gottingen Street. She was 24, and she had the kind of voice that made the room stop talking. She sang a cover that night, and she sang it beautifully. But something about the way she held the microphone told me she was looking for material, not just applause. We talked for 3 hours after the show. By the end of that conversation, I had played her 2 of my melodies on the pub's battered upright piano, and she had already started shaping lyrics on a napkin. We were married 2 years later. The arrangement made sense from the beginning. I wrote the music. I wrote the melodies, the chord progressions, the structural architecture of every song. Catherine wrote the final lyrics, shaped the narratives, and performed everything with a voice I could never have matched. We were genuinely a team. I worked days at the depot and evenings in our spare bedroom with a 4-track recorder and a notebook. Catherine worked her restaurant job and spent her nights recording demos in the same room. By 1993, she had a local following. By 1995, she signed with a small, independent label out of Toronto called Northern Chord Records. By 1998, her first album, Harbor Light, went gold in Canada. The second album went platinum. By 2003, Catherine Caldwell was a household name from Street, Johns to Victoria, nominated for 3 Juno Awards, and featured on the cover of Saturday Night Magazine as one of the most distinctive voices in Canadian music. Daniel was born in 1991. He grew up watching his mother perform on stages while I sat at the mixing board or in the back of the venue with a notebook. To him, his mother made the music. His father took notes. The distinction seemed obvious from where he stood, and I never pushed him to look at it differently. I was busy making the next record. The separation happened in 2007. 16 years of marriage ended because Catherine said she had outgrown the life we had built together, that the person she was becoming needed room I could not provide. The settlement was handled through lawyers over 8 months. She received the house in Wolfville, primary custody of Daniel, the touring equipment, and the performance rights to her catalog. I received my notebooks, my recording equipment, the co-publishing agreement we had signed in 1995 with Northern Chord, and every other weekend. It is fair, her lawyer told me. Catherine is the performing artist. She is the one the public knows. She is the one generating the revenue. I signed the papers. What choice did I have? Within a year, Catherine had moved Daniel to a private school in Toronto. She hired a manager and a booking agent. She began referring to herself in interviews as a songwriter first, performer second. The songwriter part was not wrong exactly. But it was not the whole truth either, and she never went out of her way to correct the part that was missing. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Dartmouth and started teaching guitar lessons 3 afternoons a week at a music school in Bedford. $40 an hour, 12 students, enough to cover rent and groceries, Daniel visited in the summers until he turned 15. Then it was Christmas. Then it was Christmas if he could manage it. The last time he called me on my birthday without prompting was 2014. "Dad," he said during one of our last regular visits, "you have to be realistic about your situation. Look at what Mom has built. You need to do something with your life." Catherine had won her third Juno by then. She was headlining festivals. She was collaborating with artists from Montreal and Vancouver and Nashville. She gave keynote speeches at music industry conferences about the creative process and the courage required to build something from nothing. I read the profiles from my apartment in Dartmouth eating toast for dinner. My share of the co-publishing royalties came through SOCAN twice a year. Enough to supplement the teaching income, but not enough that anyone who looked at my life from the outside would have understood where it came from. Daniel graduated from Ryerson in 2014 with a degree in arts administration. He joined his mother's management company the same year as junior coordinator. By 2020, he was managing her touring schedule, licensing negotiations, and brand partnerships. He bought a condo in Liberty Village. He posted on Instagram about the power of inherited work ethic and the responsibility of carrying forward a parent's creative legacy. He did not mention which parent. Catherine died in January of this year, pancreatic cancer. She fought it for 11 months, and then she was gone at 60 years old. Daniel organized the memorial concert at the Rebecca Cone because Catherine had always said Halifax was where it started. 400 people came, her bandmates, her record label, journalists, industry contacts, fans who had followed her since Harbor Light. I sat in the third row because Daniel had put my name on the list, and I was not going to let the discomfort of being there stop me from saying goodbye to the woman I had loved for half my life. That is when Daniel took the stage to speak. "My mother," he said into the microphone, wrote her way out of obscurity. She sat alone with a blank page and a guitar, and she built something that will outlast all of us. He talked for 12 minutes about her discipline, her vision, her willingness to sacrifice comfort for art. He talked about the Harbor Light sessions, and the Juno nominations, and the sold-out tours. Then he looked directly at where I was sitting. "Some people in this room settled for small lives," he said. "They let fear make their decisions. My mother never let fear make her decisions. She showed me that you have to be willing to work, to commit, to believe in what you are creating, even when the people around you cannot see it." The room was silent in the particular way rooms go silent when everyone understands that something is being said about a specific person and that specific person is present. 400 people knew he was talking about the guitar teacher from Dartmouth who had never done anything worth remembering. Daniel finished his speech and people applauded, and nobody made eye contact with me during the reception afterward. I drove back to my hotel room on Barrington Street and sat by the window, looking at the harbor, and thought about a meeting I had been told about. A meeting scheduled for the following Thursday at a law office on Bay Street in Toronto. An estate meeting, Catherine's will, a co-publishing agreement that had been sitting quietly in a filing cabinet for 28 years, generating royalties that most people had never thought to ask about. 2 days after the memorial, Daniel called me. He was businesslike, efficient, the tone of someone who has already made all the decisions and is simply informing the remaining parties. "I want to talk to you before Thursday," he said. I told him to come by the hotel. He arrived in a cab wearing a gray wool coat that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He sat in the chair by the window and looked around the room the way you look at something that confirms what you already believed. "This is temporary," I said. "I know that," he said. He pulled out his phone and opened a document he had been drafting. "The estate is straightforward," he said. "The house in Wolfville, the investment accounts, the royalty administration contracts, the brand licensing agreements, the master recordings. All of it passes to me as sole beneficiary. Mom was clear about that in her will." He showed me the screen briefly, a summary document, not the will itself. "There is one thing I want to address before Thursday," he continued. "The co-publishing agreement from 1995. I want to buy out your share, clean and simple. I can have an offer to your lawyer by end of week." "What kind of offer?" I asked. "Something fair," he said. "Given your level of contribution over the years." He said, "Contribution, the way you say a word, when you do not fully believe it belongs in the sentence. I looked at him for a moment. What do you think my contribution was? I asked. You provided support, he said. Creative input here and there. But Mom was the songwriter. She was the one who sat with the blank page. I know the mythology, Daniel. I was in the room. He put his phone away. Look, he said, I am trying to be generous here. The catalog is worth somewhere around $4 million in licensing revenue over the next decade. I am prepared to offer you $300,000 to walk away from the co-publishing rights entirely. He said it the way someone says something generous. I asked him if he had read the co-publishing agreement. He said he had reviewed a summary. I asked him if he had read the agreement itself, the full document registered with SOCAN in March of 1995. He said the details were a matter for the lawyers. Exactly, I said. The morning after Daniel left, I received a phone call from a woman named Patricia Ose. She was Catherine's entertainment lawyer and had been managing the estate administration. Mr. Caldwell, she said, I want to make sure you have independent legal representation before Thursday's meeting. I do, I said. I had retained a lawyer in Halifax 2 weeks earlier, a man named Gerald Firth, who had spent 30 years in music publishing and who had gone very quiet and then very focused when I showed him the original co-publishing agreement. Patricia Ose paused on the phone. She said, There are elements of your wife's estate that may be different from what your son is expecting. I understand, I said. Another pause. She asked if I still had my original composition notebooks from the period 1989 to 2007. I have all of them, I said. 42 notebooks. Every one dated, every melody sketched out in my handwriting, every chord progression documented in pencil before we ever went into a studio. Patricia said that might be useful. She asked if I was available for a preliminary call with her and Gerald Firth on Wednesday morning. I said yes, and after I hung up, I sat with my coffee and thought about a Thursday morning in March of 1995, when Catherine and I had sat across from a man at Northern Chord Records and signed a document that neither of us had fully understood. At the time, we were young and excited and desperate to get the record made. The co-publishing split had seemed like paperwork. It had not felt like something that would matter 28 years later. But 58% assigned to my legal name as composer had been registered with SOCAN, and it had been generating royalties twice a year ever since. And the total value of that agreement, the music lawyer Gerald Firth had explained to me carefully, was not $4 million. It was closer to $7.2 million over the existing licensing contracts, the streaming residuals, and the projected revenue from the song catalog assuming standard industry depreciation. $300,000, Daniel had offered me, for $7.2 million in legal entitlement. I poured my second coffee and looked out at the harbor. Wednesday's call lasted 2 hours. Gerald walked me through the legal position carefully. The co-publishing agreement was binding and registered. The SOCAN documentation clearly listed me as the primary composer on 41 of Catherine's 47 recorded songs. The remaining 6 had credits split between Catherine and a co-writer she had worked with in 2015 after our separation. The agreement from 1995 had never been dissolved, renegotiated, or bought out. Catherine had made no attempt to change it during the divorce proceedings because her lawyer at the time had focused on physical assets and performance rights and had not understood the long-term value of the publishing side. Or perhaps Catherine had understood and had not wanted to draw attention to it. I could not know which. What I knew was that Gerald Firth had reviewed every document and was prepared to walk into Thursday's meeting with a very clear position. Patricia Ose joined the call for the second hour. She told us that Catherine's will had a section Daniel had not been shown in the summary his lawyer prepared. She said Catherine had revised the will 14 months ago after her diagnosis. She said that revision was significant. She said Daniel was going to need time to process what he heard on Thursday, and that she hoped I was prepared for a difficult room. I drove to Toronto Wednesday night. I checked into a hotel on Adelaide Street and laid my composition notebooks out on the bed. 42 notebooks covering 18 years of mornings in the Dartmouth apartment, evenings in the Wolfville house, afternoons in studio parking lots with a pencil and a legal pad. The melody for Harbor Light was in Notebook 4, sketched out in January of 1992, while I was waiting for a bus on Gottingen Street in a snowstorm. I had written it in pencil on the inside back cover and then transcribed it properly when I got home. The melody for Tidal Distance, which had won Catherine her second Juno, was in Notebook 11. I had written it the night Daniel was born, sitting in the waiting room at the IWK in Halifax, with nowhere to put the energy of it. I held Notebook 4 for a while before I put them all back in order. Then I went to sleep. Thursday morning. The law office was on the 31st floor of a building on Bay Street. The boardroom had floor-to-ceiling windows and a view north toward the lake that was cleaner and colder than anything the harbor at home ever offered in February. Daniel arrived with his lawyer, a man named Brendan Sharp from a firm that handled entertainment and real estate. He was dressed formally again, the gray coat now over a navy suit. He looked at me and nodded once, the nod of someone who has already won and is managing the graciousness of it. Patricia Osei sat at the head of the table. Gerald Firth sat beside me. The estate accountant, a woman named Helen Cho, sat to Patricia's left. Before we begin, Patricia said, I want everyone to understand that Catherine spent considerable care preparing this estate. She worked with me for 14 months after her diagnosis to ensure her wishes were documented clearly and thoroughly. Daniel opened his leather notebook. Mom was always organized, he said. She was, Patricia agreed. She was also very specific about certain corrections she wanted to make. She pulled a sealed envelope from the top of a document stack. It was marked in Catherine's handwriting. To be read aloud at the estate meeting. I want you to hear this in her words. Daniel nodded, pen ready. Patricia broke the seal and unfolded 4 handwritten pages. She cleared her throat and began to read. To my son Daniel, to my ex-husband Robert, and to the witnesses gathered here. I am dying, and I have been carrying something that needs to be put down before I go. For 30 years I allowed a version of our family's story to exist that was not accurate. I allowed it because it was easier than the truth, because the truth was uncomfortable, and because I told myself it did not matter as long as the music existed. But the truth does matter, and Daniel deserves to know it before he tries to build his career on a foundation he does not understand. Robert Caldwell is the composer of my music, not a contributor, not a supporting figure, the composer. He wrote the melodies and chord structures for 41 of my 47 recorded songs. He wrote them in notebooks in our kitchen before dawn while I was still asleep. He wrote them in the car on the way to gigs. He wrote them on the back of shipping manifests from the depot where he worked nights to keep us afloat. I was the lyricist and the performer. I was the voice and the face and the business. But Robert was the foundation everything else was built on. Daniel put down his pen. Patricia continued reading. During our divorce, I allowed the settlement to focus on the assets I had clearly generated. The performance rights, the touring revenue, the public-facing business. I did not draw attention to the co-publishing agreement Robert and I had registered in 1995, which legally reflects his 58% ownership in the song Catalogue. That was not an oversight. It was a choice I made because I did not want to have a difficult conversation. I am having it now because I will not leave my son a legacy built on a lie. Daniel looked at Brendan Sharp. What does that mean? He said quietly. Sharp placed his hand on the table in the way lawyers do when they are about to manage something. Patricia kept reading. I am directing my estate to reflect the legal reality of the co-publishing arrangement. Robert Caldwell's 58% share in the catalog is already his by contract and registration. What I am directing additionally is that my 42% share of the publishing, along with the master recording licensing contracts, the streaming administration agreements, and the commercial licensing portfolio, be transferred to Robert as well. Daniel will receive the Wolfville property, the personal investment accounts, and $1. The $1 is not cruelty. It is a symbol. It is me asking him to start building something with his own hands. The room was very quiet. Daniel stared at the letter. He stared at it for a long time. That is not possible, he said finally. The catalog is worth millions. Mom built that. I watched her build it. Patricia set the letter down and looked at him steadily. Your mother built the business around the catalog, she said. Your father built the catalog. Daniel turned to me. You knew, he said. You sat in that auditorium and listened to my speech, knowing this was going to happen. I said, I sat in that auditorium because I wanted to say goodbye to your mother. What would you have believed if I had said anything before today, Daniel? He had no answer for that. Gerald Firth opened his briefcase and placed a document on the table. This is the original co-publishing agreement registered with SOCAN in March 1995, he said. Robert Caldwell listed as primary composer, 58% publishing share, 41 songs. He placed a second document beside it. These are the SOCAN registration records for each individual track. 41 primary composition credits, all registered under your father's legal name, all generating royalties for 28 years. Daniel picked up the documents. He looked at them the way you look at something that is rewriting sentences you thought were permanent. This could have been structured differently, he said. Composers assign rights all the time. People buy out shares. Maybe this was just an administrative arrangement. Helen Cho, the accountant, spoke for the first time. The agreement was never amended, she said. No buyout was ever initiated. The royalty payments have been directed to Robert Caldwell's account twice annually since 1996. $32,000 to $68,000 per year, depending on licensing activity. I watched Daniel do the arithmetic in his head. The expression that came across his face was something I recognized. I had seen it on students who realized for the first time that the piece of music they were trying to play was harder than they had assumed. I reached into my bag and placed notebook 4 on the table. The pencil notation for Harbor Light was still visible on the inside back cover. Dated the 14th of January 1992. I opened it and turned it toward Daniel. This is the melody your mother performed on her first record, I said, written at a bus stop on Gottingen Street in a snowstorm. 17 months before we went into a studio together. Your mother's voice made it what it became, but this is where it started. Daniel looked at the notebook. He looked at my handwriting, the dates, the pencil marks. He sat back in his chair. Patricia placed a final document in front of me. Mr. Caldwell, she said, these are the papers for the full estate transfer. With the co-publishing agreement plus the additional direction in Catherine's will, you are now the primary rights holder for the entire song catalog and all associated licensing. I signed the papers while Daniel watched without speaking. 28 years after the original agreement, the full value of the work was being put under my name. The number, when Helen Cho confirmed it for the room, was $7.2 million in existing contracts and projected revenue. Daniel's jaw moved slightly. He said nothing. An hour after the meeting, I took the elevator down to Bay Street and walked east toward the lake. The air was the particular cold that Toronto has in February, flat and gray and indifferent. I thought about what I was going to do with a $7.2 million music catalog at 63 years old. I thought about the guitar lessons I had on Monday afternoon. I thought about the notebooks in my bag. I thought about Daniel sitting in that boardroom, looking like the floor had been removed from beneath his feet. 3 days after the estate meeting, I received a phone call from Daniel. He did not apologize in the traditional sense. He said he had been thinking. He said he had spoken to Brendan Sharp and 2 other lawyers he trusted, and they had all confirmed what he had heard in the boardroom. He said he had also listened to Harbor Light for the first time since he was a teenager. Really listened to it. He asked if we could meet. I said yes. We met at a coffee shop on Queen Street, not far from his condo. He arrived before me and was already sitting with his hands around a mug when I came through the door. He looked like he had not slept in 3 days, which I suspected was accurate. He said, I told 400 people you had wasted your life. The same night I said that, you knew you owned 58% of everything Mom ever recorded. I sat down. I ordered a coffee. I said, I knew what the agreement said. I did not know what your mother had done with the will. That was not something I was certain about until the meeting. He nodded slowly. But you suspected. I suspected your mother had been thinking about the truth for a while, I said. She was not a dishonest person by nature. She just made a choice a long time ago that got harder to undo as the years went on. Why didn't you fight for it sooner? He asked. Fight how? I said. Your mother's career supported you through private school and university. I was not going to blow up the life she was building for you to settle a dispute about credit. That is not what fathers do. Daniel was quiet for a moment. He wrapped both hands around the mug. He said, "She let me think you were nothing. She did not correct me when I said things about you. She let me build my whole idea of success on a version of her that was not real." I said, "She believed in what she was building, and she was genuinely good at the parts she did. Managing a music career is not simple. She was talented in ways that are easy to underestimate. But yes, she let the other part go uncorrected for a long time. I think the will was her way of trying to put it right." Daniel looked at the table. He said, "She wrote me a separate note. I found it in an envelope with my name on it at the bottom of the document box. He did not tell me what it said. He did not need to. In the weeks that followed, I met with Patricia Osei and the licensing administrators to understand the full scope of what I had inherited. The Harbor Light songs were still generating royalties through streaming platforms and a film and television sync licensing agreement that Catherine had signed in 2019. 3 songs from the second album were licensed to a national retail chain for in-store use. Titled Distance, the Juno winner, had been used in a documentary about the Maritimes that was still running on CBC. The administrative side of a music catalog is not simple. Patricia recommended I retain the same management company Catherine had used and transition gradually rather than restructuring everything at once. I agreed. I was a guitar teacher from Dartmouth. I did not need to perform competence I did not have. Daniel called me 10 days later. He said he wanted to keep working in music administration. He said he was good at the business side, regardless of how his assumptions about its origins had turned out to be wrong. He said he thought he could be useful to the catalog management if I was willing to have that conversation. I asked him what he thought he could contribute. He listed 3 things carefully: tour licensing negotiations, streaming platform relationships, and brand partnership vetting. They were the right 3 things. He knew the industry. He had built those skills honestly, regardless of what he had believed about where the music came from. I said, "There is something I would want from you in return." He asked what. "I want you to understand the songs, not the business of them, the music itself, where it came from, how it was made, what decisions went into every structure you have been licensing for the past 5 years." He was quiet. "Can you teach me that?" he asked. "Some of it," I said. "The rest you will have to find in the notebooks." 6 months later, Daniel flies to Halifax 4 times a year. We sit in my apartment in Dartmouth with the notebook spread across the kitchen table, and I walk him through the composition process for the songs he grew up hearing on the radio without ever wondering how they were made. He is learning to read chord charts. He is learning what a progression does and why the one in Harbor Light creates the particular feeling it creates. Last month, he asked me why I had written the bridge of Tidal Distance in a minor key when the rest of the song was major. I told him it was because the bridge was about loss, and the major key would have been dishonest. He thought about that for a long time and then said, "That is a completely different skill from anything I have spent the last 10 years learning." I said, "Yes, that is the point. The catalog is being managed now under a revised administrative structure. Patricia Osei's office handles legal, the original management company handles touring and sync licensing, and Daniel handles the brand partnerships and streaming relationships. His name in the industry has shifted slightly. He is no longer exclusively known as Catherine Caldwell's son and heir. He is beginning to be known as someone who understands both sides of the music, the business and the craft behind it. That is a different thing to be, and it is his own. The licensing revenue for the first year under the new structure came in at just over $600,000, the strongest performance the catalog had seen in a decade. Helen Cho sent me the statement with a short note that said simply, "The original agreement held up well." It did. 30 years of quiet documentation, SOCAN registration numbers, dated notebooks in pencil, 42 volumes of ideas that had arrived on bus rides and in waiting rooms and in the dark hours before anyone else was awake. They held up exactly as well as they needed to. Last month, Daniel was invited to speak at a music industry panel in Ottawa about heritage artist catalog management. He accepted, and he spent 2 weeks preparing. The morning of the panel, he called me to talk through some of his opening remarks. He wanted to start, he said, by explaining why he had spent the past 6 months learning music theory at the age of 33. I asked him what he was planning to say. He said he was going to talk about the difference between inheriting a business and understanding what made it. He said he was going to talk about how he had grown up thinking success was something you received and how he had discovered it was something you made, one notebook page at a time, usually before anyone else was watching. I told him that sounded right. He said, "I am going to mention you in the opening." I told him he did not have to do that. He said, "I know. I want to." After we hung up, I made a coffee and sat by the window that looks out over the harbor. The same harbor I had looked at from the depot on those night shifts in 1989, moving cargo and writing melodies in my head. The water does not change much. The city changes around it. But if you have been paying attention long enough, if you have been writing things down and dating them and keeping the notebooks, the record is there when you need it. Sometimes the most important victories are the quiet ones. The ones that required no performance, no confrontation, no speech, just patience and documentation, and the willingness to let the truth do the work when it was finally ready to move. If this story stayed with you, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes the best thing you can build is the one that speaks for itself long after you have left the room.